Chapter 6 of In the Field, 1914-1915. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by FNH. In the Field, 1914-1915 by Marcel Dupont. Chapter 6. Chapter 6. A Tragic Night in the Trenches. November 3, 1914. Imagine a little tiled room, some 16 feet by 9, in which for over a fortnight passing soldiers have been living, sleeping and eating. Imagine the furniture overturned, the broken crockery strewn on the floor, the doors and drawers of the cupboards pulled out, their modest contents scattered in the four corners of the house. Add to this the windows without glass, doors broken in, rubbish of every kind lying about, brought no one can tell whence or how. And yet note that one or two chromolithographs, a few photographs of friends and relatives and certain familiar objects still cling to the walls, evoking the life that animated this home but a short time ago. And you will get some idea of the place where my Major, my comrades of my squadron and I were lodged on that memorable November evening. It was 5 o'clock, and night was already falling. The cold, damp, misty night of Flanders following on a dreary autumn day. Outside the guns were roaring far away. The Battle of Yser was going on. Our regiment had just been brought by rail from the Reims district, where it was to the north of France and thence to Belgium. Our chiefs had said, "You must leave your horses. You must forget that you were ever cavalrymen. You must make up your minds cheerfully to your new calling and become infantrymen for the time being. We are short of infantry here, and the Germans are trying to rush Dunkirk and Calais. Your country relies upon you to stop them." Our good chasseurs left their horses at Elverdinghe, 10 kilometres from here. They came on foot, hampered by their heavy cavalry cloaks, dragging their riding boots through the atrocious mud of the ruined roads, carrying in their packs, together with their ration of bread and tinned meat, the huge load of 120 cartridges. They arrived here in the firing line, and quite simply, as if they had never been accustomed to anything else, did wonders there and then. Yesterday, I grieve to say, I was not at the head of my troop. I was unable to take part in the epic battle around Bixschoote, the poor Belgian village which was retaken and then abandoned by us for the 20th time. I was not present at the heroic death of the gallant and charming Colonel d'A. of the Chasseurs, the author of those heart-stirring pages, and among them "The Charge," which brings tears to the eyes of every cavalryman. He died facing the enemy, leading his regiment to the attack under terrific fire, and when his men carried him away they ranged themselves round him to make a rampart of their bodies for the chief they adored. I was not able to share the danger of my young comrade, Second Lieutenant J., who fell bravely at the head of his marksmen in the middle of my beloved regiment, in which fresh gaps have been made by the enemy's bullets. My seniority had marked me out as officer of liaison to the general commanding our division. But this morning at dawn I came back to take my place in the firing line, and I think I shall be able to make up for lost time. The day has been absolutely quiet, however. After the fighting of the day before, and a night of sleeplessness and incessant alarms in the trenches, 3 of our squadrons, mine among them, were relieved before dawn and placed in the reserve. They found billets in little forsaken farms some 600 yards from the firing line. Our men rested as well as they could all day, making beds of the scanty supplies of straw they found, washing themselves in pools, and renewing their strength in order to relieve the troops which had remained in the trenches, a squadron of our regiment, a squadron of the Chasseurs, and a section of our infantry Chasseurs. Seated on a broken box, I was doing my best to write a letter, while Major B. and my brother officers O. and F., together with Captain de G. of the 3rd Squadron, took their seats at a rickety table and began a game of bridge. Here, by the way, is a thing passing the understanding of the profane. I mean the non-bridge player. This is the extraordinary, I might almost say the immoderate, attraction which the initiated find in this game, even at the height of a campaign. What inexhaustible joys it must offer to make its adepts profit by the briefest moments of respite in a battle to settle down anywhere and anyhow and give themselves up to their mysterious practices. I pause for a moment in my letter writing to enjoy the sight, which has its special charm. 2 or 3 kilometres off, towards Steenstraat, the cannon were working away furiously, while only a few paces from our shanty a section of our 75's was firing incessantly over the wood of Bixschoote. Overhead we heard the unpleasant roar of the big German shells, and in the midst of the racket I saw my bridge players dragging their table over to the broken window. Day was dying, and we had not seen a gleam of the sunshine since morning. The sky was grey, a thick, dirty grey. It seemed to be very low, close upon us, and I felt that the night would come by slow degrees without any of the admirable symphonies of colour that twilight sometimes brings to battlefields, making the combatant feel that he is ending his day in apotheosis. But those four seemed to hear nothing. In the grey light I watched the refined profile of the Major bending over the cards just dealt by F. He, no doubt, has to speak first, for the 3 others looked at him in motionless silence, as if they were expecting some momentous utterance. Then suddenly, accompanied by the muffled roar of the battle music, the following colloquy took place, a colloquy full of traps and ambushes, I suppose, for the 4 officers cast suspicious and inquisitorial glances at each other over the cards. 1 spade. 2 hearts. 2 of trumps. I double. Your turn, Major. But all of a sudden, paff, paff, the 4 players had thrown down their cards, and we all looked at each other without a word. Suddenly we had just heard above us that strange and indefinable crackle made by bullets fired at close range as they tear through the air just above one. No doubt was possible. Something extraordinary was happening near the trenches, for the crackling increased mightily, and hundreds of bullets began to whistle around us. F. sent the table rolling to the other end of the room with a kick, and we all rushed out after the Major. There is no more depressing moment in warfare than when one finds oneself exposed to violent fire from the enemy without being able to see whence it comes, or what troops are firing, and what is the objective. Obviously the attack was not directed against us, for between the trenches and the houses where we were there was a thick wood which entirely concealed us from the sight of the enemy. But on the other hand the shots could not have been fired at us from the trenches the Germans had hitherto occupied opposite us, for had they been, the bullets must have passed high over our heads, and we should have heard only the characteristic whistle of shots fired at long range. For a moment, only a moment, we were full of dread. What had happened? What had become of the comrades who were in the firing line? Grouped together in the little enclosure bordered with quick-set hedges, where there were still traces of what had been the kitchen garden of our farm, we strained our eyes to see without uttering a word. In front of us was the dark line of the wood. We scrutinised it sharply, this silent mass of trees and bushes, on which autumn had already laid the most splendid colours of its palette. In spite of the dull light, what an admirable background it made to the melancholy picture of the devastated landscape. First, quite close to the ground, was a tangle of bushes and brambles, its russet foliage forming a kind of impenetrable screen, which in bright sunshine would have been a curtain of purple and gold. Then, pointing up into the misty sky, came the denuded trunks of the trees, surrounded by a maze of myriads of delicate branches, their ramifications stretching a violet tinted veil across the sky. In spite of the tragic present, I could not but admire the marvellous setting Nature offered for the drama in which we were destined to be the actors. The bullets continued their infernal music, whistling in thousands over our heads. At the same time the fire of the German mortars redoubled in intensity, and their great coal boxes, big shells, burst with a deafening din a few hundred yards behind us, seeking to silence our guns. These, concealed in a hollow, answered vigorously. But what did it all mean? What was happening? We longed to shout, to call, to implore some one to answer us, to tell us what had been taking place behind the thick curtain of the wood. But the curtain remained impenetrable. In the few seconds we spent below that deserted house in the little trampled garden close, under the rain of bullets that was falling around us, one dread oppressed us, and lay so heavily on our hearts that it made us dumb and incapable of exchanging our thoughts, or rather, one thought that haunted us all. What has become of the second squadron? What has become of our Colonel, who had stayed in command? What has become of all our dear fellows there on the other side of the wood?